right, welcome back. And we're looking at the very, very important issue of medicine, especially chronic diseases that are now starting to stalk Africa, especially Kenya, because of lifestyle issues, because of improved nutrition and all that. So it means that we're living longer, but we're living longer with more diseases. And you're here with one of the people who is involved in making sure the world gets better. I think it's your job to ensure that we are all as healthy as we can be. That issue of medicine, because one of the biggest issues globally is how to fund the health sector. So you have a situation where people are living longer, and because they're living longer, they need to keep on drugs for quite a while. How do you get that funded, which is one of the biggest and most crucial issues?
Well, yes, I think that is a big issue, but I also think the funding of the healthcare system itself, healthcare capacity, is a big issue, education of the general public. What we aim to do in Kenya is trying to develop a new distribution model which will benefit people, as we call the bottom of the pyramid, the poorest in low-income countries like Kenya, who today unfortunately do not have access to very essential, affordable medicine due to distribution systems. So, for instance, off-patent insulin, which are life-saving drugs for people with diabetes, are prohibitively expensive due to the way it's distributed today.
You were telling me that you distribute almost half of the world's insulin, which is
correct.
Obviously, that's a very important thing.
Yes, yes.
To distribute medicines for diabetes and diseases like those. But you have that problem which is you've just alluded to, which is patent versus off-patent.
Yes.
In effect, when a medicine is on patent, it's sometimes expensive because of the research and development that goes on behind it.
Yeah.
Once it's off patent, it's slightly cheaper, it's more available to people everywhere in the world. But you, as a drug company, obviously get caught between the two. You still want to be able to make back your money in R&D, but at the same time, you have a problem with the fact that you need to distribute to as big a market as possible.
Yes, but I do believe that it's upon the Western economies in the United States and in Europe and also in Japan, the wealthy nations, to pay for the innovation, such that other countries, emerging markets and lower income countries, can benefit from this when the drugs become off patent and can be made available. Let me mention just the fact that generic human insulins, which was first introduced about 25 years ago in the West, is now available in Kenya at the cost of less than a can of Coke. So it is not prohibitively expensive if we make sure that it's distributed and available at the doorstep, close to where the patients need it. So they don't need to disrupt their daily life, take a day off and go to the dispensary, but rather that it's available close by every day, all the time.
You know, one of the funny things I remember reading is that people say that the private sector is better able to distribute cold stuff, basically that what you're calling a cold chain, beer companies, soft drink companies, because they have kiosks everywhere that actually have a can of cold or a bottle of cold drink.
Yeah.
How well are you able to work with them in that regard?
Well, our distribution systems for medicines are slightly different and need to be slightly more controlled than general foods and soft drinks, so to speak. So there are actually quite good distribution systems which currently exist for essential medicines, which is set up by faith-based organizations, but also with the government. And we aim to demonstrate that it is possible to reach through setting up local distributors that on a profit basis with a small margin can handle inventories and distribute these drugs closer to the patients. And once this has been established, I think this can be scaled up to all of this country, but also many other emerging economies.
Going back to the issue of who pays for the development of a drug, because some of these diseases, you find some unique diseases that come out of tropical countries such as ours. There's some that are general. Diabetes is everywhere, especially because of lifestyle, people not eating the way they should eat, lack of exercise and all that. Now, when you have illnesses or diseases that are unique or at least endemic to places like tropical countries, it may not be profitable to develop drugs for such illnesses, which means that we still fall short. If you look at things like malaria, which may not be endemic in more northerly countries, in richer countries, how do you cover that gap again in terms of being able to...
Yeah, I think my assessment of how we can deal with this is that we need to have international funding agencies that identify together with the recipient countries what are the most important illnesses to deal with, and then set up funds for research programs so that the commercially based innovative companies can compete with each other as if there was a real market. And those that come first to market will of course benefit, and thereby being able to repay their investment and make the drugs available. Otherwise, as you rightly point out, these diseases will not be dealt with if there's no market, because you need to have a market to run the risk of making investment in R&D.
You were speaking about markets, and you were telling me earlier that you have situations not just in the West, but even here, where there's two broad markets. You can look at the public market, which is people who go to public hospitals, who are funded from a public purse, but the people who, either because of the nature of their work, because of the state of their income, are able to afford privatized medicine. You're able to afford bigger insurance packages.
We have patients in Kenya that procure and use the most modern products that we make. They have the same products which are being made available in the United States and in Europe. Obviously, since they're on patent, they're slightly more expensive, but the big broad market for the general public is a generic market, but there are still deficiencies there in terms of reach and availability physically and also financially, and this is why we're here to reach the broad public. Our hope is then, in longer term, that as the economies grow and Kenya becomes more wealthy, more people can afford the more advanced product, and that will then be the business case for us in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, in 20 years' time.
Now, you positioned yourself, in my opinion, very cleverly. Because if you looked at maybe 5-10 years ago, the big fear was that there's a big divide between companies that go off and do R&D, they put in the big investments into developing these drugs. As soon as drugs go off patent, then you have big companies that come in and do generic manufacturing. Countries such as India are big on that. Now, you're positioning yourself sort of in both. So you're still doing the big medicines and the big R&D, but at the same time, when you go off patent, you become your biggest generic manufacturer.
Yeah,
How does that work?
We have always been a generic manufacturer. Our company was founded based on the discovery that insulin was lacking in people that had diabetes, and so we started manufacturing insulin. We've always been a generic manufacturer until we could innovate the insulin, make it a better and better therapy. And 80% of our activities are in the area of diabetes, and so it's very important for us to also have product that we can make available for people with low incomes, because the community of people with diabetes is our constituency. And we will only thrive as a company if people with diabetes are taken care of. And so therefore it has been a good strategy for us to have a full portfolio with low-cost product, and we can manufacture insulin cheaper than anybody else in the world. We have factories in Brazil and we have factories in China. We have dominating market shares in both India and China. As I mentioned, we manufacture more insulin than anybody in the world. And that benefits countries like this, because we can make insulin available and still make a little profit so that it makes sense and it's sustainable. Yet we can also then invest in R&D to improve the products for the future and for the benefit of this country as well.
What leads to the decision of where to set up a factory? Because when you talk about factories set up in Brazil, China and all the rest, I'd understand, because obviously those are some of the big manufacturing hubs globally. Say a country like Kenya or any other country in Africa, what would lead you to come and say, we'll set up either an R&D operation here, or we'll set up a factory here to develop drugs, rather to manufacture drugs for either this market or the global market?
Unfortunately, the issue is that the larger the plant you build, the more economies of scale you get, the cheaper the products become. So I would say that it, from a purely financial economics, doesn't make sense to make a local factory in this country. The products would simply be too expensive. Then there could be other reasons.
What about manufacturing for the global market? In the sense of, we set up a factory here and say we're manufacturing this particular drug for the global market, so the issue of markets.
We already today have strategic plants in Denmark, in the United States, in Brazil, and in China. Those plants can supply for the whole global market. We need not build any more plants. If we were to build more plants, the products would become more expensive. So it doesn't make sense from that perspective. Then there are countries, of course, which for political reasons erect duty barriers, wants to make or what demand technology transfer for political reasons. The flip side of this is, unfortunately, that the products produced will become more expensive for the local population. So that's a weighing off of two benefits. Politically, whether you want to attract technology, workplaces and investment, but yet the cost of doing so is levied on your population. And I think most economies in the world benefit from free trade. That we do things where we can do it cheapest, so that everybody can benefit from producing the products as cheaply as possible.
Now, we're in a strange situation globally now, and I'd say for the last maybe 2 or 3 decades, which is where before the big chronic illnesses were more or less for richer people. Heart disease, diabetes, and all these other diseases, because you could eat better, you're in a better place in life, in terms of nutrition especially, and you're more sedentary because of the nature of your work, so it means that you got the diseases. Now we're in a situation where they're coming lower down the income scale.
That's correct.
Heart disease is now prevalent among poor populations.
Absolutely, yes.
Diabetes is prevalent among poor populations. So it almost makes your economic case upside down. Before you could develop these drugs, be able to sell them simply because you are rich people, they could afford them. Now you're in another situation where it's poorer people who have the disease.
Well, you actually supports my business case in that we need to be involved. Let's say that. We also need to be in research, because ultimately we would like to cure diabetes. We would like to get rid of diabetes. And for that we need research. And we can still improve therapy. But it's not the poor countries that are going to pay for these new therapies. That'll have to be the West. It'll have to be Japan. It'll have to be United States and Europe. And you're right. What is happening today in this part of the world, and in fact all over the world, is urbanization. So people are moving from a hard life in the countryside where they have a lot of physical labor, which is good for their metabolism and good for chronic disease. But it's a very hard life. So people move into the cities, they become more sedentary, they start to change their food habits to more refined foods, more sugar, become heavy, get diabetes.
Stop saying become heavy, you're talking about
No.
But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and so unfortunately, as you rightly point out, these diseases used to be seen as a disease of affluence. Now it hits the poor classes as well, and it hits the poor classes in a younger and younger age. It used to be such that we called it adult onset diabetes, which were our grandparents got the disease, but now it's hitting people in this country in the age of 40 to 50, and that means that they're still breadwinners in the family. So it's from an economic perspective, it's even harder when you get disease that early, whereas we used to see it in the 60s and 70s with our grandparents.
Where are we going with regards to competition in the drugs industry? Because again, going back to the whole issue of generics, you have a lot of Indian companies coming out of emerging markets, you might call it, who are very, very big in this sector. They all want to move up the value chain to develop, to get into R&D, like you said. Where are we in terms of that between this type of competition from your traditional competitive countries, the United States and all the rest?
My assessment is that we have seen now for at least, I've witnessed at least for the last 20 years, Indian pharmaceutical companies trying to move up the value chain, going from raw materials manufacturing to do innovative medicine. We in fact have had several research projects together with Indian-based research organizations, and so far it has proven to be difficult. So I say the hurdles today of developing new innovative drugs are so huge that you have to have almost global presence to be able to afford this. The price of developing a new drug today is more than $1 billion. And it's an effort which requires skills from all the way from biology to toxicology to animal testing to human testing to administration. So it's a very complex process, and so far we've not seen that many companies in the emerging markets being successful. So I still see the role for Indian, Chinese companies largely as generic manufacturers and essential raw materials manufacturers for years to come.
Finally, where are we going to, looking into the future, maybe the medium term, 5-10 years, longer term, in terms of the whole pharmaceutical industry? Because again, something that you may have noticed is where pharmaceutical companies are no longer just pharmaceutical companies, they're almost wellness companies looking at nutrition. They also manufacture fortified foods. You have companies that now go the other direction, which is looking at, in terms of manufacturing, getting involved, even public health policy and all that. Where are we going in terms of the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, I think the general pharmaceutical industry is struggling with replacing very high volume patented medicines that are blockbusters that are going off patent. Yeah. And so lack of innovation leads then to diversification into nutraceuticals, enriched foodstuffs, into generics, into other kinds of health products. And so this is probably a trend which will continue. Ourselves have been very successful in developing new diabetes drugs, and so we are kind of the other category, a more traditional full process innovative company focusing on a very few therapeutic areas where we think we can still be successful. So we're not going to diversify into auxiliary products, health products, provision of care. I think it's problematic if pharmaceutical companies get too heavily involved in provision of care, because then we start to meddle with the political priorities and cannot really be seen as an independent provider. So I'd rather stay out of provision of care and stay focused on doing what we're good at, is innovating new diabetes drugs, educating the public about their usage, and then hopefully be successful long term in that.
All right, and you heard it in terms of where we're going from a pharmaceutical perspective, in terms of how big this market is and how this market is going to be served. Looking at specifically about the diabetes medicine, the biggest manufacturer of diabetes drugs in the world is looking at this market very keenly, but also looking at other medicines, chronic illnesses and all that. So it's been an interesting discussion, and please make sure you're with us every weekday at least from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock as we discuss this and many more issues right here on PM Live. But that's it from us. Good afternoon.